Hey friends, this is Picking Up, Part 2, Does Eating Meat Cause Cancer? Enjoy this episode. It turned out that this is going to be more than just 2 parts, but the conversation is in depth for a reason. Enjoy this episode.
Thanks for listening. If you like the candid discussion and are seeking the truth behind the mainstream narrative, then please subscribe and share. Not only am I grateful, but those who seek the truth and wish to empower themselves and their families' health, freedoms, and future will also be grateful.
It's very clear that historical records of our ancestors ate animal products, including bone marrow, brains, muscle meat, eggs, dairy, and insects. Not that I'm crazy about eating any of those things right now, or many of those things, but it's fascinating to note that that's how our evolution is very soundly based when we look back historically. And yet now it's just we're going to separate it because everything we know now is way, way better and we're smarter about it. And we'll talk about life expectancy as well here, in that that's not necessarily accurate when we look at the grand scheme of all the data. There's no traditional human culture that excluded animal products. That's awesome. That was founded by Weston Price as well. And when I look at that, it was also part of my challenge. It was something that, unless I dug into and looked further, I wouldn't have found that, because I'm just supposed to accept what the mainstream states about nutrition as fact instead of actually asking where that comes from. So although it's popular to argue that earlier societies didn't live as long as we do, it's important to note that the life expectancy figures are skewed by high infant mortality rates and the lack of modern emergency care. In the past, that's referencing. By and large, hunter-gatherers who survived lived quite long lives, and none of these groups experienced, and this is significant, the high rates of chronic diseases that we do now. Some may dismiss this walk down our evolutionary history, but the relative good health and long life of both contemporary hunter-gatherers and our forebears is an important guidepost in human health. We've tackled this topic at length in some previous episodes. So I was just paraphrasing, by the way, from a Chapter 2 out of The Sacred Cow, written by Diana Rogers, R.D., and Rob Wolf. And both of them are clinicians that provide care and nutritional advice for their patients. And they have done this over years, published several books. And what I find fascinating about this particularly is we had an event in our office where I did a challenge, which I can share that ultimately in just a bit. But the bottom line is, I'm a student of the game, and I will always be a student of the game. And what I look for in truth is what I try to understand through a lens of clarity. And my foundational lens, as I was explaining this to a patient today with questions, was she was talking about the value of soy and that her hormones she was going through some turbulence, and several things improved. And then all of a sudden she said, but my cycles have gotten really out of whack, really inconsistent, and I'm moody, and my energy is fluctuating, and there's some bloatiness coming back. And she continued to say, the only thing I'm doing is over the last 60 days, I started drinking soy milk. And some of you are already clicking with that because you realize, for one, it's phytoestrogenic. But the interesting part about explaining this was the generalizations about certain hand-picked, select-picked nutritional literature for the agenda to move the dial and say, well, I believe that a plant-based diet is the best. Therefore, everything I look in the research is going to be to support, and everything I see is supportive of the plant-based diet, which just builds my belief, builds my intention, builds my agenda even more, that that's the way it is, and because it's right for me, then it's right for everyone. And what I'm challenged here by that question the patient asked was, she was still not putting that connection together, but when I responded back, I did through a video chat, and I just said, look, here's my experience. Number one, the information you're getting on fiber And soy is very hand-picked towards this plant-based diet being superior to anything else because of what? Because of someone's current belief. We all have a bias, self-included. I have a bias. My bias, so you can be really privy to that, is that the body's self-healing and self-mending, self-healing and mending, and self-directed, self-regulating. So the body's what does the regulating. This virus is not the first virus to be exposed. This virus is like the flu. Some of you are going to say, bah humbug. I get it. You're told it's dangerous. You're told. But when you have real scientists, real doctors, real clinicians who have integrity, and they're stepping up saying, why are we doing what we're doing with this in mind, when none of this adds up? They're not dumb. They're not lacking intelligence. They're actually going against the narrative, because the narrative is not logical. The narrative does not make sense. The narrative is about perpetuating fear into your hands so that you follow suit and you get used to your rights going away, and that you get used to the government supporting you, because many of you haven't been working, or some of you are working. Many of you may still be working. But the bottom line is they want you to become more dependent on that system. And they want to take away and restrict and limit until you go through the hoops of chipped and vaccinated. Yep, I'm a free thinker. I don't think conspiracy. I think freely. I ask the question, why does this not make so much sense? What are they trying to do? Why are they taking away everyone's rights? Why are we making such a big deal out of something that is 99% recovery rate? 99, 98 at worst. And yet we're making such a big deal of it because they want to change. It's a government political piece that wants to change how we think, how we move, how we act, how we spend money, how we're allotted money, and how we move about the country and how we move about the world. So sorry for the sidebar, but I question this stuff so much not because I'm a conspiracist. It's because I realize there's so many layers. And I have the tendency to see this against a clear lens that the body's self-healing and self-regulating. The body has this intelligence, and they're trying to take away that power, and they have for years. It's not new. I've been putting up with this, dealing with this, the discriminatory aspect of some alternative healthcare provider because of the mainstream model and big pharma my whole life, and especially my absolute whole professional life clinically. And I don't back down one bit to a healthcare provider in another profession. I love and appreciate healthcare providers all across the board. There's a need for all of us. But what I don't agree with is the fact that medicine is superior to chiropractic, or medicine is superior to the body healing itself. There's no way. Without crisis care, we're not where we need to be. It's amazing. But it's not preventive care. It's not proactive care. It's not teaching us how to be healthy. It's teaching us how to live in crisis and how to live with chronic care and how to perpetuate chronic disease. And that's not what I'm about. Sorry for the rant. But this study, this book is well cited, The Sacred Cow, and what I loved about it was opening me up to other research that I also look and go, yeah, that's interesting. Where did this come from? What political backing and or who's behind that research and this research? But the refreshing piece of this book is that they looked at it very unbiasedly, and they really come clean with that in the beginning of the book, that even though, for example, organic grass-fed beef is not significantly, they found, not significantly more nutritious than conventionally grown beef. Now, for some of you, you're like, yes, I'm going to keep eating my conventional. And for those of you who are organic, you're like ticked because no way, that can't be. Well, they're reporting the facts. They're not siding with one or the other, pushing an agenda. The real thing I want you to hear there is they tested it nutritionally. They did not say that it was less toxic or considerably, significantly less toxic than conventional raised beef, even though I believe it still is less toxic because of the farming practices. I'm sure there are still, and we know there's toxins like glyphosate, Roundup, still found in organic produce and organic beef because of how rampant it is in our society and the soil and just the use of it for long term. So you're really minimizing, in my opinion, that is because we don't have that factual data yet, but it logically makes sense that that's when you're not using herbicides, pesticides as a means, that's what should qualify organic farming. You're more natural, then you're going to minimize the toxicity. Now, we talked again, just to reiterate, that was about nutrition they were mentioning, not the toxicity. So that's a very fair, maybe not so appealing, but very fair assessment, and you have to respect that where these authors are coming from. So that's why I want to talk about reality in truth versus, my truth. Well, my truth is that everything organic is super healthy because I say so, and I know everything. Well, guess what? I don't know everything. I never absolutely will. I'm a student of the game. I'm always learning, and I'm done needing to be right because I'm going to be wrong more than I'm right. But, who knows about that because I'm not keeping score. But the bottom line is I'm open to new things coming in, and I change every day. So are we eating too much meat? That's the next piece. We talk about basis for weight. We talk about the averages. So when you Google how much protein should I be eating, if you're a female and you weigh 160 pounds or you weigh 140 pounds or you weigh 175, the 46 grams that are recommended on Google don't apply to you. Why? Because that's a 125-pound woman that's referencing. In 1912, there was research that supported 100 grams a day was minimum, and it still may not be enough. And today, our stress demands and our food quality is even greater, which means we could argue that we need more. And I can see how the other side of the argument from someone who's not holistic and not necessarily that educated in nutrition would say, but our modernization has made better food quality. Not true, because agribusiness has allowed them to hide things over consumers because they won. Their lobbyists are better than yours, Big Pharma. So they get their way of how they can label food, and they can change titles, and they can hide things because that's what their industry is able to get away with. They don't want the consumer to be so savvy that they know everything, because then you wouldn't buy their products as frequently. That said, there's not a large body of data that says we're eating too much protein. There's some generalizations that have been made, and I could get into specifics, but if we just keep it simple, there's the RDA put out by the U.S. Dietary Guidelines that have recommended 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, which is where that reference came from earlier. It's important to note, however, that this minimum requirement, not the optimal amount, in order to thrive. Also, just to be clear, this is grams of protein, not the total weight of the food in grams. For example, 100 grams, about 3.5 ounces in weight, of broccoli has 2.4 grams of protein. By contrast, 100 grams of roast beef has 27.2 grams of protein. So that is very confusing, because most of us think, well, grams, how do you measure what you're looking at in terms of an 8-ounce tenderloin fillet or a 9-ounce ribeye? How much protein are you getting in that weight of meat if it's pure protein and fat versus very lean piece, which is pure protein with minimal fat? So when we translate the RDA of 8.8 grams, less than 1 gram protein per kilogram of body weight, to the public is difficult. So the folks who put together U.S. Dietary Guidelines basically decided to give actual quantities. They based the numbers on a reference man of 70 kilograms, which is a 154-pound male, and a 57 kilogram or 125-pound female, and calculated the numbers based on those references. So if you go to the internet and you look up how much protein should I eat, the numbers will be 56 grams for a male and 46 grams for a woman. This is also what the health professionals will tell you, which is again, a very generic answer, and it's not accurate necessarily to you, nor is it accurate to what your body's going through. More on that later. What your body's going through at the time means it will affect your need for protein and also whether or not you're digesting and assimilating it. So the first problem is, how many men do you know who are basically 154 pounds? I don't know too many. I might know a couple. That's it. And women who are 125 pounds, I know a few. That's not as difficult. But the CDC says the average American man is 195 pounds, while the average woman is about 166 pounds. So that's a big difference from the above reference for a man and a woman. According to the 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight calculation, the average American needs 71 grams of protein per day, and the average American man needs 71 grams of protein, and the average American woman needs 60 grams of protein. That's just kind of a standard recommendation. So what's the next problem? Remember, this is the minimum you need to avoid disease, not the optimal amount of protein. That's what I'm talking about. Is we keep talking about the minimum daily requirement. To what? To barely survive. That's not adequate to run the systems of the body with stress on top of it, with demands on top of it. The current RDA for protein intake is explained in the dietary reference intakes by the Institute of Medicine, which based their original protein recommendations on nitrogen balance studies. It gets a bit technical, but basically nitrogen balance is the difference between nitrogen intake and excreted nitrogen. It's difficult to measure and varies greatly between individuals. It's very easy to underestimate adequate protein levels based on these studies. And in fact, basically, here's a quote. In adults, it's generally presumed that the protein requirement is achieved when an individual is in zero nitrogen balance. To some extent, this assumption poses problems that may lead to underestimates of the true protein requirement, end quote. Protein, or the nutrient density of the best protein sources. Humans don't really need protein, by the way. We need the amino acids. And meat has the perfect balance of amino acids plus micronutrients that plants don't have. More on that later. When I mentioned the 1912 study that talked about 100 grams, it's pretty interesting. They referenced the nitrogen balance studies that were questioned as inaccurate measures of protein requirements and a recommendation of at least 100 grams of digestible protein, which is basically bioavailable protein, more on that later, be consumed. So anything under 100 grams a day was found to lead to ill effects. The reference for this 1912 study was done in London, Longmans Green, by David McKay, titled Protein Element in Nutrition, back from 1912 as stated. Was really quite interesting. So what would be the optimal or even adequate amount of protein look like? So there's another set of numbers called the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, AMDR. It's defined as a range of intakes for a particular energy source that is associated with reduced risks of chronic diseases while providing adequate intakes of essential nutrients. The recommended range for protein according to the AMDR is 10 to 35% of caloric intake. By the way, the 1977 guidelines shared the recommendation was only 10 to 14%. So how does this translate to our diet? The USDA estimated calorie needs per day recommends a diet of 2,000 calories per day for average moderately active woman and about 2,600 calories per day for a moderately active man. Using the 10 to 35% of calories from protein, the thin reference woman of 125 would need 50 to 175 grams of protein per day, and the reference man needs 65 to 228 grams of protein per day. This is a huge range, by the way, isn't it? This makes the commonly accepted 45 grams per day for a woman and 54 grams per day for men below the AMDR range. Okay, folks, this is really cool. So most Americans are getting about 16% of their calories from protein. And a recent study showed that American adults over 50 were getting much fewer, with 46% not even hitting the RDA of 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Why do you think that is? When we're pushed in society to stop eating meat and we're getting culturally nixed or scolded or judged for eating meat because you're not culturally educated and you're certainly not societally respected if you're doing that according to that theory. And so it's just fascinating when we're kind of pushed against it like it's bad that of course we're going to eat less of it, and that's what's happening. So from the paper, those not meeting the protein recommendation were more likely to have intakes of other nutrients below recommended levels. Those below the protein recommendation had significantly more functional limitations across all age groups, while grip strength was significantly lower in those over 70 years old. At a conservative 20% of calories from protein, the average woman on a 2,000 calorie per day diet would need 100 grams per day. 100 grams of protein. This number is more than double the commonly assumed protein requirement of 45 grams a day. In fact, when we're telling women to only eat 45 grams of protein, we're recommending less than 10% of the total calories. That just cracks me up, how off the mark it is, and yet this is supposed to be healthy.
What's the most cost-effective, most affordable, and portable way to get into infrared sauna technology? Therasage360.com. Use code FSDW360 for your discount today. Delivering results that last.
You ready for this? When we're recommending 100 grams of protein, largely from animal sources, why? Because it's the most nutrient-dense source right now that we know of on the planet. When recommending 100 grams to a largely from animal sources, this equals about 4 to 6 ounces of meat per meal 3 times a day. That sounds like a lot. Honestly, it does. And it's really not a lot when we talk about what we're trying to do to nutrify the body, to thrive, to enhance human health and increase inner resilience and strength by increasing the ability of the body to regulate and maintain itself in its environment and adapt to the current stressors. In other words, have the body meet the supply in the body of nutrition demands to run all the systems, hormonally included, immune system included, and then process and digest food, be ready to fight in flight, while it's meeting the demand of the environment. So the supply within the body meeting the demands. And that's like any good business. You have to have supply to meet the demand. A lot of people, especially women, push back and feel like this is too much. However, once people actually get this level of protein in their diet, they generally feel a lot better and eat less calories. Because why? They feel so full, satiated, and that's why in this work, these guys have done this with their patients, as I do as well. It's incredible when we look at the percentage. So just think about it. 10% of your diet being of protein is purported as healthy. Purported by who? That's the real question you want to ask. The next question is, how does it apply to you? Because that's what I really care about. I don't want to teach you something that is the next layer of someone else's stuff. What I want you to do is ask the question. I'm simply proposing another school of thought by researchers that came in unbiasedly because they have questions about what's happening here and why are we so chronically sick when we're supposed to be healthier by eating less meat, and yet that's not what's happening. We're actually more sick and we're more unhealthy. So who gets the credit? Well, who gets the blame is also the key. And the blame has really been pushed onto red meat. And I was fascinated and just felt like, man, how could nature put out such a balanced, formidable food source that our ancestors were, in the toughest times, developing strength and tenacity and resilience and and persistence and overcame so many obstacles, and yet now it's the wrong food for us. That does not make sense to me, and it won't. So it forced, again, it created the questions and the curiosity for me to go seek some answers. I'm sorry this got so heavy, but it's a piece that has to be addressed in the real question upcoming in part 2 of this, does meat cause cancer? Because unless we talk about these things, you can't hear just the simple piece about meat causing cancer that's been really misrepresented. And that's where we're going to go to next. So, number one, I wanted to share with you how undernourished we are from a protein standpoint. And I think this is the big nugget as I talk about this topic so much in my office, and I talk about it with people that have come in with really serious health problems, and we turn their health picture around. And my website and my office is filled with testimonials of these folks who share their stories. So it isn't Dr. Wade just trying to promote. It's really Dr. Wade saying, wow, people, you are more powerful than you realize, and you have been sold a bill of goods. And my job is to help show you how incredible your body is and how incredibly you can heal your body, and how amazing this human organism is to be able to just turn things into healthy, functioning tissue, and how to develop a strong, bold, vibrant, robust immune system so you don't have to live in fear. My perspective was historical in that precancerous, my wife had looked at some blood labs and said, honey, you're protein deficient. And I'm like, how can I be protein deficient? I ate a fair amount of protein. I'm also, as I shared, so I'm O positive. I'm a hunter-gatherer. By nature, my body loves and requires protein, which is what I learned from that vegetarian experiment that I did. And it turned out to be an experiment, but it was really a vision that I was trying to carry out. I thought I'd be healthier if I lived a vegetarian lifestyle, and it turned out I didn't. And that was an awesome, awesome lesson for me, because I stayed open to the real answer, the results. The results were the results. And then you say, well, how did you develop cancer later stages? I'll fill you in more on that, but that would take up too much time right now with this process. The first thing I did do is realize that the same people I was helping with spinal disc problems and spinal connective tissue problems and inability to hold alignment problems, we were dealing with the ability for them to digest and assimilate protein. They were either not getting enough in their diets, number one, or they were getting a fair amount of protein in their diets, but they weren't digesting and assimilate it. In other words, they weren't breaking it down and absorbing it to get it into their tissues so their body could build healthy tissue. And that's when we started working with a lot of our protocol in our office, and the technique that I developed in gathered from some of my mentors, but now refined into a technique that's unique in and of itself. That's how I get to the bottom objectively, by testing patients and then finding out where their weaknesses are, getting them on a structural program of care that actually restores the foundation and plugs leaks, and then help them rebuild where they need to rebuild to get their body back in line. And I do that in a way that's unique to that person because of who they are, what they're ready for. Not only do I meet them in the middle, but I also teach them how to listen to their body on their own so they can fine-tune this for themselves, as if I'm not there, as if I'm not going to be here forever, and they can be self-sufficient. That's the real key, is to teach people how to, A, understand their body, and B, how to take care of it so they can live the healthful life they're supposed to and reach their potential. That's why I look at it like this, and that's why I had to reevaluate what protein, what meat does, how it can be so damaging, how it isn't damaging, how it's actually very health-promoting, and looking through the politics of it all in society. So sorry for the verbosity, the verbose episode here, but there is a lot of meat here. Yes, pun intended. So hopefully you enjoy part 1, and I will look forward to doing part 2 for you and tying in the cancer piece to this, and we'll break through some myths. So until next time, enjoy eating your protein, enjoy consuming 10 to 35% of your diet being protein, leaning into that 30-ish% range would be very good. And my challenge for you is to do that and watch how you feel, and make sure you're getting enough magnesium if you're upping your protein, so your colon and your body is digesting and assimilating, and you're softening the stool enough to do that, because many of us are magnesium deficient. So that only makes it appear that protein is binding you up and clogging your bowel movements, but actually it's also a combination of being magnesium deficient and not enough protein. So you want to do both to make sure that the colon still moves. And I would gather, because I can't guarantee, and I'm not giving health advice, I'm making informational purposes only, is making this for informational purposes only, is that you start looking at that and doing your own test. And then I would love your feedback. Share with me what you found. I'm curious. I would love to hear some of your wins, and if so, I'd love to see it. So thanks again, and I will see you on the next episode. If you're wondering how much protein might work for you, what's appropriate, how to get your body back on track, how to do a reset other than the detox, there's all kinds of information out there, but one of the most successful programs we've created was the Feminine Carnivore Challenge, reclaiming your feminine physiology. For those of you who are men and want in, you can't. It's not for you. The key word is feminine. You could email us at Anunson Chiropractic, ANUNSON Chiropractic @gmail.com, or call our office, 608-829-2250, and my staff is happy to help. Thanks for listening. Our Facebook group at Health Warriors on Fire. And remember, you have what it takes to heal, mend, and be your best. God bless.
Okay, my fellow health warriors, it's time to head over to iTunes, franklyspeakingdrwade.com. There, you can rate, review, and subscribe, as well as share, so more of our brothers and sisters can grow to realize their voice and their health freedom. Speaking up means you matter, so get on it. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements or views expressed are not medical advice and are not meant to replace the advice of your medical doctor. This podcast, including Dr. Wade Anunson and his guests, disclaim responsibility for any adverse effects you may experience from the specific use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse and accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about the guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for such services or products. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical condition, consult your licensed physician.